Hi, this is Lindsay Schoolcraft, A Cradle of Filth, and you're watching Conversations with Vin and Sorry.
I'm Vin.
I'm Sorry.
And I'm Alistair from Ashenspire.
Yes, so
we're very excited to have this very quick interview with you because we just recently had done your song. So getting this opportunity is pretty big for us, especially for Vin.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the video, you guys remember, I said, that's the last thing I said.
Yeah.
Even after I signed off, I said, I'm getting an interview
with these people.
Which, as a YouTuber, doing this, you always want to get an interview. Obviously, It's like, whoa, But
you don't always get the opportunity.
I just think based on where we are right now, in Europe and in America, the message of your band is important. So the record that we reviewed was, I think it was something at Perdition's Gate, the
Mariners at Perdition's Lighthouse.
Right. And then you guys had, what's the name of the album? It was a very provocative title.
Yeah. It's called Speak Not of the Laudanum Quandary.
Okay. So
it's a mouthful.
Yeah. So we don't do any research on the bands. Right. So our idea is we're going to listen to it, we're going to react to it, and, feel the emotions for the first time. But also a little bit, one of the things we do a little bit different is a lyrical analysis. And so you just read it cold. So I was very provoked by the title of the album, but I didn't know where you were coming from. So if you could just articulate real quick, what went into the title? What was going on there?
It's a good question. Okay, so the whole album is about, it's essentially a critique of British imperialism. So like in the UK, a lot of the time when we are like kind of educated as to our role in world history, what we basically learn that the empire existed and that generally speaking we benefited from it, but it's never really gone into any great detail as to how that went, like how that came across. So there's very little talk of the slave trade. There's very little talk of colonialism, our role in like genocides in Australia and Africa. And the laudanum quandary comes from a specific incident in British imperial history. So the idea was that Britain was basically, it had control of the Middle East, where it was growing a lot of opium poppies, and part of the way that the empire was generating revenue was through selling opium or laudanum to various parts of the world. And one thing that it tried to do was, there's a series of wars that Britain went through called the Opium Wars in China, where the Chinese government shut the country down because the opium that was coming into China was shutting down the workforce, and and this was a ploy on the part of the empire.
I was gonna say, that doesn't just sound like we're gonna sell these drugs and generate capital. It also sounds like
destroy them as well.
This is how destroy the Chinese people and make them sort of dependent on us because we're the supplier for
exactly. So there's this kind of two-pronged exploitation of foreign peoples, and I mean Britain literally went to war to enforce this like illegal drug dependency that it created, and won. It had a devastating victory, and so that had like major repercussions on Chinese culture for a really long time. And so the laudanum quandary is this like ethical and moral dilemma that British people should be parley to, in that, okay, so we have as an institution inflicted massive suffering on the world at large, and that should, for our own benefit, and that should give us pause. That should make us you know, a little bit worried, a little bit, you know, concerned, guilty, ashamed, wanting to, like, you know, make reparations, but we're told to not think about this, right? This is not something we're encouraged to critique. And I think, you know, like various countries throughout the world have, you know, kind of had this same sort of imperial role where they, you know, they've colonized the place and extracted its natural resources and blah, blah, blah. But this was just kind of coming from a UK perspective, because I think, particularly in the modern world, the British Empire, more than any other, has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, it's real. That was very succinct. Thank you. Which you
so
said
wait, they don't talk about it in school?
Well, not in any great detail. Like the things that we tend to get taught in like history, when you're kind of growing up, and then a little bit later in high school, they tend to be things like world wars, things like internal struggles that happened like within the UK. There's not very much looking at like Britain's role in the kind of late 1700s, 1800s colonization of the world. Whenever we do talk about the slave trade, it comes from like a really like American African dichotomy sort of situation, which isn't fair at all, because, you know, there's very much it all comes down to like a three-way trade, you know. So yeah, it's not encouraged to be critical. In fact, in many places in the UK, it's encouraged to be celebratory about the empire. And, you know, a lot of people, particularly people who voted for Brexit, for example, some of them perceive the UK as having lost some of its greatness. And, you know, like breaking away from the EU is a way of reclaiming this lost glory. And part and parcel of that is this like imperialist notion that we were a great power at one point and that we've lost that.
Right. Okay. So great in the sense of, because there's no doubt, objectively speaking, you know, the sun never sets on the British Empire, da da da. So in one context, you could say it's great as in just as far as mass goes. But when you say we're not great, you're talking about the moral ramifications of having an empire where the sun doesn't set on it, because that you accomplish that by millions of dead bodies, right? I mean,
exactly so.
That's how you accomplish it. Is there a sort of you're going to laugh at me, but my only real understanding of British politics is Good Morning Britain with, what's my guy? What's the guy's name?
I don't know. I like Morgan.
Oh, yeah. And during the whole Brexit discussion, the Boris discussion, I kind of got this almost very strange sense that the Trump brand of America, that there is a faction in Britain, maybe not a faction, but maybe there's an overall zeitgeist in Britain where there's almost this admiration for the American. We don't need anybody. We can do it all ourselves. We don't care about the global community. We care about America, America first. There just seems to be a sort of admiration for that ethos, and that there's almost this sort of energy that we need to be like that. I mean, is that a good read, or is it more trying to reclaim former glory and you see the Americans as the closest thing to what you guys had before?
I think both of those readings have like a degree of reality. I think that there's something of an insecurity complex not being the world's greatest power anymore there. And I think like it all comes down to like a similar feeling of like alienation in the working class being put to kind of being misdirected, right? So, you know, a lot of people in America, working class people in America and working class people in the UK have seen a significant decrease in their standard of living over the past few years, decades, under the rule of like overly conservative or right-wing governments, but this frustration and this anger is directed towards the idea that we've somehow lost something. You know, a lot of like white supremacists will make this claim that, you know, once upon a time, in whenever it has to be, like it doesn't have to be any real time, but like at one point in someone's past, this place was great. Make America great again. Right. is you know, has this implication that that we need to reclaim what we once lost. And I think a lot of people who have ended up moving politically right in the UK identify with that, and they feed off of the success that Trumpian politics have had in the US. Now, we don't really have a figurehead in the same way as that in the UK. Like, Boris Johnson is like pretty roundly seen as like a kind of inept fop.
He doesn't seem dangerous, whereas Trump is seen as being an existential threat, not only to America but to the whole world by his detractors. Is Boris Johnson not seen as a guy who could wreak an existential crisis on the planet?
Absolutely, he is. He's just like, how do I explain? It's difficult because in Scotland we have a very different atmosphere with regards to politics.
Okay.
A lot of what happens to us comes as a result of UK politics as a whole, but you know, we have our own government and we have our own elections, and the governments that we tend to vote in are very different politically. You don't see a lot of people in Scotland who would be the sorts of people that would vote for Boris, for example.
Okay.
So, like, if you look at a voting map in the UK, Scotland tends to overwhelmingly vote for a left-wing candidate, whereas in England, this past election season, like the Conservatives were, you know, they dominated. So, does Boris Johnson seem like an existential threat? I think in Scotland we have this kind of this feeling that things have gone against us for so long that, frankly, the UK is a lost cause, and in the next few years we'll probably be independent and be able to make our own decisions on that. I think that
independent from the UK.
Yeah.
And at that point, do you presume that you guys would go back to you would reverse Brexit because then you'd have your own kind of votes, or?
That would be the hope. I mean, there's been some talk about joining the Nordic group, so with Norway and Sweden and Iceland and such. And, you know, I think everyone, like, overwhelmingly Scotland voted to remain. So I think in Brexit. So I think the impetus would be to make moves to rejoin the EU in that circumstance.
Got it. So just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, I kind of initiated those questions at the beginning in order to give my guy the credibility he deserves. Because you know what happens? A lot of times it's like, you know, there's a situation where LeBron James, basketball player, he made a comment about something that Trump said, and of course the beautiful people at Fox News, one of them said, "Just shut up and dribble." You know, like, you're a basketball player. What the hell do you know? And so I can, you know, you're a band, you're a musician. And so, you know, the temptation from the uninitiated would be,
absolutely.
But so the first 10, 15 minutes of this interview demonstrated very clearly that this brother knows what he's talking about. Now that we have that out of the way, so tell me about the band. Tell me about the name of the band, because that was also very intriguing to me. And tell me how it formulated.
Okay, so, well, Ashenspire is a name I came up with in 2013. And I had been kind of musing on the city around me. So I grew up in a really rural area and moved to Glasgow in 2012 for university. And when I got here, you're kind of struck by a lot of the architecture that's around you. Like I'd never really been surrounded by industrial landscapes. I'd never been surrounded by high-rise tower blocks, and all of this kind of like struck me as like this really profound aesthetic of life in a post-industrial city of the UK. So the Ashen just means grey, and spire is a big, tall, pointy thing, and that's, you know, it has a couple of meanings. So I was thinking about, like, in the context particularly of this album, I had a lot of imagery of industrial factories belching out smoke from their chimneys. So that, like, in Glasgow in particular, there's a lot of tenement buildings that are stained black with soot from you know, the industrial era, and you know that is the most literal, I think, take on the name. Then with the next album that we're doing, it's kind of more looking at high-rise brutalist architecture and you know, what impact that has on cityscapes. I was also kind of thinking about nuclear weapons a little bit. Read into that what you will, I suppose. So a band formed when my first band was a folk metal band that we won't talk about very much because it was terribly embarrassing. But like we were kind of writing music together, and we were writing a lot about Scotland and kind of antiquity, Scottish antiquity, Pictish stuff and all the rest of it. And I was basically getting a bit sick of how kind of cheesy the music was, and I wanted to write something a bit more serious. And I got together with another guy from the band, a guy called Mitchell Morrison, who we've written together, been in bands together for a long time. And we started making this kind of darker, more intense sound. And it got weirder and weirder as time went on, and we added more people. And I asked my friend James Johnson, who's our violin player, to come and join. And that kind of catalyzed like even further experimentation. And then by the time that we were kind of putting the songs together, we'd kind of left antiquity behind entirely, because I was getting really, again, the theme here is getting sick of and responding to a trend in that style of music to, and this kind of links in with what we were talking about earlier, pushing one's history under the rug and romanticizing, glorifying one's history when, like, you know, there's a lot of, in folk metal in particular, there's a lot of national pride. And you know, that's not inherently bad. You know, it's particularly important if you're like a previously colonized nation that is reclaiming its sovereignty.
Well,
right?
For me, right, as a Black person in America, where you're kind of cut off from your roots and your fathers, because quite frankly, in the slave trade, I mean, you were literally cut off from your fathers. When we started doing the channel, because I didn't know anything about folk metal, some of the Norwegian stuff where they're talking about the old past and things like that, that immediately struck me as a positive thing, because it's something that I'm missing, right? So the you know, a lot of the Viking stuff before Christianity came in, even though that's my team, but we did a lot of in the world, we all know that. I was like, wow, this is a beautiful thing. But I could also see where it could metastasize into something very socially dark, in the sense of these people are the reason that we don't have this former glory. So let's take out all our frustration on these people. And we've listened to a couple songs where that has been the case. And
like, I saw you guys reacted to Bortsum at one point, and like Varg is of course notoriously like white nationalist, and like it's, the thing is, the lines between the bands that are Nazis and the bands that just like their country is so difficult to exactly. And there was really a bit too much of that in like our circles. And I was just like, you know what, we're going to take the exact opposite route. We're going to have a message that is completely antithetical to like non-critical national pride. We're going to encourage the listener to look at their position in the world and like really, really think about what got them there. And whether your nationality is anything to be proud of. Personally, like, I don't mind being Scottish, I quite like it. But I was just born here. It doesn't, like, it's not something I'm proud of. I didn't achieve anything to be Scottish.
You successfully traversed the birth canal. Yeah. Okay, so that then is a reason for the purposefulness of the agenda.
From the time where you guys were doing like the folk stuff till it kind of transitioned, how long was that?
Maybe a year, 2 years, something like that. I remember, like, there's still bits that we wrote in kind of summer 2013 that ended up on this album. Like, just a riff or two here. Yeah, in the title track and in, I think Mills has a little bit of old stuff and Grievous, but only little bits and pieces survived from them because we were writing music about, you know, I did a lot of archaeology at the time and I thought that was fun. And then it started becoming like metaphor and stuff, and then all of a sudden I was like, nah. So yeah, maybe only.
Was there any pushback internally from the band, or was everybody kind of feeling the same unease about the scene, and you were just the one to catalyze it?
Well, certainly with the kind of core group, we were all very much on board together. So Mitchell and I have developed quite a lot politically in the years since we started. And he doesn't play with us anymore, but since then, like, we have like quite a diverse and politically engaged group here. So like when the change started happening, it was as a result of like a positive feeling in the group. Like, no, this is good, this is important, this is something we need to be doing.
Okay. Was it accepted by the people around you, or like, what about the older crowd? Like, does the older crowd think, oh, this isn't good, or are people accepting of it, or what have you seen?
Generally, people are accepting of it. There's been a much bigger push in the scene over the last few years for kind of left-wing black metal, because for so long, I mean, there's a whole subgenre within black metal for the Nazis. Why shouldn't we have our own voice, a counter, like a position of strength to show to black metal fans? Be like, hey, look, you don't have to go to these guys for something extreme, like, because that's a toxic road. That path leads to destruction, right? We need to provide an alternative, and that's kind of like what we were doing. There are certain groups who have rejected what we're doing, but that's no great surprise. Whenever you make a political statement, people say, oh, metal should be apolitical. Yeah, but that itself is a political statement.
I was just going to ask you about, I mean, I ended up, creating an entirely separate channel to address politics, but that is because of the YouTube algorithm. It has nothing to do with it. But, I would make certain...
Yeah, because politics comes up in our reviews a lot.
Well, politics is just life lived through the lens of the civic apparatus that we all have. I mean, it's life. So that's a really interesting thing to me, this whole thing about politics and metal, because, you know, we really dug into Metallica's catalog, and you've got One, which is a song about war. You've got Disposable Heroes. You've got For Whom the Bell Tolls. You've got, I mean, these guys, Slayer, talking about Angel of Death, talking about the Holocaust, things like these guys who are like the seminal bands that kind of formed our perspective of metal. They were all talking about political stuff. And then when we went way back, you know, into the 60s, obviously there's Vietnam, and it's almost like every artist had to speak about Vietnam in the 60s, otherwise you weren't. So what do you think people mean when they say that metal and politics need to be in completely different universes when from the beginning? And then when you think about punk, you know, punk is almost all political. So what do you think is actually being said there?
Well, I think it's the same way, you know, when people have certain inbuilt biases that they're not encouraged to challenge, those get entrenched over time. And, you know, like, I was reading about this the other day. I don't know if you guys played the Wolfenstein games that they released a few years ago, but like Wolfenstein's about killing Nazis, right? It's not shy about that. The first one was released basically to no real big deal, and then the second one was released to a big backlash. And over the time between those two games being released, things like Gamergate happened, and the Trump administration got in, and all this. So I think what people want when they listen to music is to not be challenged on things that they don't want to deal with, right? So I mean, people can listen to a Slayer record and just think, oh, cool, that's really fast, and it's got lots of riffs, and he's shouting a lot, and it could be just for the shock value. You know, there are multiple ways to read into Angel of Death, for example. Right. But if you are told you're not you shouldn't be listening to a band that, you know, denies the Holocaust, or you shouldn't be listening to a band that, you know, makes claims about white supremacy, they'll resist that because they think, oh, well, I should be able to do whatever I want, and people should be allowed to consume whatever they want, without any consideration for the impact that has on the people around them. So I think when people say they want metal to be apolitical, what they're really saying is, I'm quite happy where I am, thanks very much. And I don't want to have to think about it too hard.
I don't want to be challenged.
I think that's the perfect word. I don't want to be challenged, because I think that there's a lot of controversial things that comes up in metal music, but if you're on board with it, you're like, yeah, people equal shit. You know what I mean? Like I think that people like, but if it's something that that challenges them, then that's what they're not interested in. I don't think everybody's like that, but I think that there are lots of people that don't want that challenge, because we see it in the comment section. Some people, they love the, you know, the banter, they like the, you know, but then there are other people that are like, why are you talking about politics? Well, it's a completely political song.
Well, I'll tell you, whenever if the song comes up about Vikings and it talks about how the Catholic Church went in there and completely ruined their entire existence, right? And I go, that damn Christianity, they're our team, and I'm a big believer in critiquing your team first, which is what you do.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah.
And so it's like, damn it. And, you know, in the comments, people are like, that's right. You know, that's right. That's screw those Christians, burn them. But then when I say things like, hey, wait a second here, we got a race problem in America. People will say, why are you always bringing race into it? Hey, there's a dude, I don't know if you've been watching on the news in America, but there's a dude that got chased down and cornered and shot.
Yeah. I've been keeping up with that one,
I don't watch those videos anymore, because, you know, for me, I know what's happening, and all those videos do is just serve to enrage me and make me angry. I've been seeing black folks get shot on camera literally since I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
But whenever I bring it up, there's always somebody that goes, "Oh, why are you bringing race into it?"
Yeah.
Which is like,
Well, I mean,
because I have black sons, you dummy. And there's that sort of like, you know,
yeah,
kind of unease that happens there, and
yeah, there's that tension, and yeah, it totally comes from this like, well, in metal, it's like, oh, metal's meant to be shocking. And when you say, like, hey, look, you can't be a Nazi, they'll go, oh, I'm just trying to be controversial. I'm just trying to start a conversation, man. And I'm like, you're trying to start a conversation about whether the Holocaust happened or not? That's not a good conversation to have.
Right.
Like,
right.
Yeah.
And there's a similar problem. Like, if black metal's problem is Nazis and white supremacists, death metal's problem is like sexual violence. And like overtly gendered violence, which is like so prevalent and completely absurd, to the point that most death metal fans are like nonplussed by it. And when you're kind of immersed in that, it's like, whatever. But there is an extraordinary amount of like stuff on rape and similar things in like brutal death metal, which is something that I've, spoken out against before. And you get a similar sort of backlash. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have to think about this. It's just to be controversial. It's just and they never think for a second as to like, what could you do that's also controversial, but like good?
Right.
Like, could you make a statement that challenges people in a positive way, rather than just being like unnecessarily destructive?
This, what I'm about to say, is very convenient for me as a Christian, but I'm going to throw it out to you and try to challenge you a bit here. We just released the song like 2 minutes ago, but I was talking about the concept of moral relativism, where 20 years ago, at least in America, especially pre 9/11, we were almost completely morally relativistic. It's like, hey man, you do your thing, I do my thing, I won't judge you, da 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 da. Hey man, hey, whatever, believe what you want. 9/11 happened, and that kind of shifted things, because you had a group of people saying our way is the right way, your way is the wrong way. You had a foil like bin Laden. Never mind our unilateral support of Israel, our setting up our battle stations in holy ground in Saudi Arabia, our intervention all over the world, our literal bullying the world and holding the entire planet at gunpoint. None of that had anything to do with 9/11. It's just that, so I understand that there were geopolitical issues that precipitated 9/11, but what ended up happening, at least in America, was you had Bush come out, and he said, you're either with us or you're against us. You're either for the side of the terrorists or you're for freedom. And then you had silly stuff like freedom fries instead of French fries. Like, and then you had, so when you start speaking that way, then it kind of bifurcates things, and it was no longer, well, I mean, you can think whatever you want, we'll think whatever. Now it's like, people are going to die. We're going to put bodies on the ground. Whose side are you on? And if you're not on our side, it doesn't matter if you're a civilian or not, obviously.
Yeah, there's a line drawn.
You killed between 250 and 1 million civilians just in Iraq alone since 9/11. The 250 number is the low number.
Exactly.
It's actually closer to 1 million, but I don't want to get distracted by the actual, because people say it's not 1 million, it's only 250. It's like 250,000.
That's still a hell of a lot of people.
Right. So I think that was one of those moments where, and then you had the Iraq invasion, and the Iraq invasion was another situation where people started to say, wait a second here, why are we going in there? Wait a second. Like, we understood Afghanistan, right? Taliban's doing the Pashtunwali thing. They're not sending bin Laden out because, I mean, they couldn't. It wasn't necessarily because they were Muslim. It was, that's their culture. If you have a guest, you protect that guest at the cost of your own life. But we didn't care about little nuances like that. So we all understood why we went into Afghanistan. But then people started saying, well, wait a second, what do the Iraqis have to do with this? Mm-hmm. And that was another moment where the moral relativism stuff didn't work, because you had people mostly on the left. I was on the right at the time. I don't know what I am today, to be honest with you. You had people on the left saying, this is not right. We shouldn't go in there. What are we doing? And then the whole oil conspiracy came up. And we're going in there to take these people's oil, kill them. And then all of a sudden, on the Iraq question, there was no moral relativism. It was either you were on the side of good, which is we need to leave those people alone, or you were on the side of evil, which was we're going to go in there and kill those people and take their shit. And then the next thing that I saw was the Trump election, where now it's over. To me, moral relativism in America, at least on the geopolitical level, is over. You're either with Trump on his side and you love America, or you're against Trump and you hate America. As a matter of fact, there's a whole cabal of people in America called the resistance. And supposedly the media and all these people are in some resistance against Trump because we're like in the so like to me it seems that ever since 9/11, at least in America, moral relativism has sort of given way to a sort of fundamentalism on both sides, on the left and the right. And I'm not necessarily certain that that's a bad thing if we can figure out how to come to a conventional understanding of morality without killing each other, which historically speaking, we haven't been able to do. So that was a big, long setup to this question is, are you seeing us moving away from moral relativism to a more fundamentalist understanding on the left and the right?
Okay, so I think what's important to define here is where relatively left and right are. So in America,
true,
my understanding of it is that what we consider the center is your left.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And what we consider the far right is your right.
Right.
So when...
So just real quick, a centrist in Britain, universal health care is just it's an assumed thing.
Well, like it's universally assumed to be a good thing, but centrist politicians may or may not still be okay with selling off, like privatizing parts of the NHS. But yes, universal healthcare is not seen as a radical idea. It's not seen as a left-wing idea.
Whereas here, we had Bernie Sanders being compared to Nazis and Lenin and all this other. Yeah. Okay. Continue.
So, I think the issue is that the people who sit on either side of this divide, particularly when it comes to Trump, are liberals and conservatives.
Yeah.
What is liberal in America is not necessarily what is left wing. So a left wing reading of the state in America would be, there is a vast amount of disenfranchised people who are unhappy with the circumstances that they're in, that they've been forced into, and the best thing for them is for them to collectivize and to find common ground and to have a kind of universal understanding and to take power for themselves.
Yeah.
But the liberal reading of the situation is Trump bad, all people who like Trump bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like that.
Yeah.
And Trump is bad. That's not the problem with the argument. The problem with the argument is that people say people who voted for Trump are evil people or are bad people. Those are people who were faced with the choice of, do you want more of the same crap you've been fed for the past 20, 30 years, or do you want this guy who says he's going to change things?
Right.
And frankly, I was hugely disappointed that Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race recently, because he was the only genuine alternative that could have been offered to the American people. Even like personally, I didn't think people like Elizabeth Warren were nearly left-wing enough, but I certainly didn't think Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg was like anywhere near the answer that, like, you are not going to convince a Trump voter with Joe Biden.
No
right?
way.
It's not going to happen.
Never happened.
What and like people, I have like I've talked with a few Americans about this, and they say, "Oh, I don't like these people who say they won't vote if Bernie doesn't run." And I'm like, look, I get what you're saying here, but the fact that there are people who were ready to vote for Bernie tells you that there are people who are energized by him, who are being left behind by the state of politics and need something else. And there were loads of Trump voters who would have voted for Bernie. And that's the thing. Like, the argument should not be, if you voted for Trump, you're bad. It should be, right, how do we provide the people who voted for Trump something positive and something that is actually going to give them a material change in circumstances? Because Trump has no interest in helping the working class of America. Not even close. He's like hoping to accumulate as much power and influence as possible and then get away scot-free. Like, in my reading of it, like people like Bernie Sanders want to change the way that wealth is distributed. They want to change the way that people are looked after.
Complete structural overhaul.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And that is why the gatekeepers at the DNC ensured that he never got past the primary.
Yeah.
So back to your musicianship, because you're a musician, damn it.
We did start the interview with the intention of talking about music.
So you've got all of this is in your brain.
Yeah.
How do you translate that sonically, especially with the instrumentation? Like, how does songwriting work for this band?
So, I mean, it really depends how I'm feeling. Like I do a lot of the writing on my own at the moment, but historically I've worked with a number of the other members of the band. And most of the time it starts with kind of like an idea, a phrase, maybe a series of words that occurs to me when I'm kind of musing. And then with that in mind, I start kind of playing about on the guitar or whatever, and you discover a sound that encapsulates what you're thinking about in that moment. And then I kind of go back and forth between adding bits and pieces musically and writing lyrics. And at the moment, I'm writing more music than writing lyrics. And a lot of the words that are ready for album 2 are just kind of sitting in a document in like lots of different little broken bits, ready to be built upon. But so it starts from a concept, like, for example, I wrote a song for this next album about poor housing, right? Like insufficiently built housing and the impacts that has on people's physical and mental health. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like I'm taking influence from places like in America where, you know, they used lead paint in the walls, and that had, like, particularly in Black communities, and that had, you know, a significant impact on things like crime disproportionately.
Why are you bringing up race? Completely irrelevant.
How dare I? And like in Scotland, like a lot of our social housing was built with asbestos.
Yeah.
And like, so I was kind of like writing about that. So I kind of had that idea in my head, and I was like, okay, well, what sort of music sounds like you have asbestositis? Like, what sort of music sounds like living day in and day out in a place that is not fit for purpose, and that may eventually be like knocked down? What does that insecurity sound like? What does that, what's the despair, knowing you have no other option, sound like?
Wow.
Wow.
I was listening to Terence McKenna. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Terence McKenna is the big DMT guy. He's the one that in the 60s and 70s brought psychedelics into the consciousness of the Western world. And he was talking about how, you know, everybody, there's this ritual. They all take this DMT. It's very interesting stuff. I'll send you some links. Very, very freaky stuff. One of the things he said that reminded me of what you just said was that the method of the poetry that, so they would take this drug and then they would start singing and whatever. And so Terence McKenna is an outsider and he's watching this ritual happen. And then after the ritual was over, everybody would kind of debrief with the shaman. And they said, I loved it when you were singing that blue and that gray, and then it showed up as purple and orange. And they were hearing it, but instead of it processing as sound, they were seeing it.
That's cool.
And so he went on for about you know how McKenna is. He went on for an hour and a half about that, about, you know, the brain. His thing is like trying to demystify supernaturalism, right? So, you know, these people, they take this drug and they go all different places and they appear to be, you know, clairvoyant and da-da-da-da. And so Terence McKenna was trying to figure out the scientific explanations for these things. And so when they were talking about the colors and things like that, he had something about neural pathways or whatever, but it reminded me of your guys' song, the one song that we heard, because I felt like I was in some dreary,
I know,
dark, some horrible, you know, and I'm watching these poor bastards with the, you know, welding and all this. And do you, is that your goal when you're trying to make people see the colors, smell the smells, or
100%. Like totally, because you can't, I feel that until someone can feel empathy for another group, they're not going to make moves to make life better for that group. So I was really pleased to hear, like, when you guys were reacting to it, all like, this is how I feel, this is what I'm seeing, like these images are being conjured up in front of me, because that was exactly what I was going for. I wanted people to have this, like, okay, what is it like to be a dock worker? What is it like to slave away day in, day out, building ships for a pittance, like, to go home to again, subpar accommodation. There's a lot of themes of like living in unpleasant circumstances in my work. But yeah, that's what we're going for, and I think it works pretty well on Speak Not.
So it had nothing to do with purgatory then. I was completely wrong.
It didn't have anything to do with purgatory, but I thought it was a good read because, you know, it's this kind of limbo state of between things, between like, if all your life is just labor and, you know, eating and sleeping, then there's very much this steady state of unpleasantness. Like, I don't think that was a bad read at all. But yeah, I was definitely trying to conjure up more of a hellish
That's why I said perdition at the beginning. I explained it to you and everything.
Get away from me. Wait, I have another question. Stop dominating these questions. Okay, so do you guys create music by, like, do you have like a theme and then you say we're going to go with this theme? Or have you ever created a song by, like, you have a certain feeling inside of you, and so then you create words and music to match that feeling?
Well, there's a song that's coming up on the next album, which currently has the working title Persephone, which is, it doesn't have any lyrics at the moment, and I just wrote it because I felt the way it sounded. And like, I was listening, there's a really incredible grime artist in the UK called Edward Scissortongue, and he sounds like if he makes hip hop that sounds like I want metal to sound. Like, it's the, you would honestly, like, absolutely outstanding album. Tell Them It's Winter, it's called. Listen to it in full. It's some of the best lyrics you'll ever read in like in a hip hop album, and it just sounds incredible. And so I was listening to some of that, and I was just thinking, I want this kind of groove driven, melancholy vibe. And I'd been toying with experimenting with saxophone, and I was listening to a lot of Bad Bad Not Good, which is again kind of hip hop and jazz outfit. I was like, all right, so I'm going to steal some of these kind of Colin Stetson vibes and just kind of build on this. And one thing that I've been trying to do is take one musical idea and allow it to grow over time.
Yeah.
Which, like, on Speak Not, I wasn't so good at that. It was more like move from idea to idea to idea like that. And it's been, writing this next one has been an exercise more in restraint and organic growth. And there's a fair amount of schizophrenic jumping about, but I don't think I can avoid that. I just think I like that kind of music.
Are you guys signed? You guys are signed to a label, yes?
Yeah, we're signed to Code 666 Records, or Oral Music, which is an Italian label with loads of really cool people on it.
Nice.
Really, a lot of cool records.
Okay, excellent, man. Thank you so much for this time. I've got a lightning round set of questions for you. I lied to you. I lied to you. I told you it was gonna be half an hour.
You did. You lied. You're a liar.
I was up for the long haul and excited to do this. So let's go.
Okay, first metal CD you ever bought ever in your life?
First metal CD I bought was a. Oh, okay. So this is stretching it a little bit, proto metal maybe, but I bought a Deep Purple Greatest Hits when I was 12, called Deepest Purple, and it contained within it a lot of the weirder things that would later form a lot of my musical taste. So obviously there's things like Smoke on the Water or whatever, right? But when I heard Child in Time for the first time, just like a 9-minute prog epic, I'd never heard a song that was that long before. And it was like, what, this is still going? And the thing is, it's like enthralling the whole way through, and it's utterly incredible. So, and I would go away from that kind of music for a little bit in my music taste, and then I came back to it. And kind of was like, oh, it was this all along. It was this all along. So
found you. Most recent metal album you bought?
Ooh, now I'm going to have to check my Bandcamp for this because I've been buying a lot more recently. With lockdown and stuff, I've had a lot of room to acquire new music. Most recent metal album I bought was Oak, Ash and Thorn by Dark Forest, which is a kind of traditional heavy metal or power metal band from the UK. They kind of sound like kind of medieval almost, like lots of kind of Arthurian vibes.
Cool.
I'm a big like D&D nerd, so this is like the sort of thing that I really dig in the times when I'm not trying to create really horrible, ugly music.
Best live band you've ever seen?
Best live band I've ever seen. There's been a lot. The one that blew me away most was probably Snarky Puppy. It's a jazz fusion band, and like
I'm up too.
Like their live show is astounding. Their musicianship is totally aspirational, and like I hope maybe one day I'll be even slightly close to as good as any of them. But yeah, I loved watching Snarky Puppy. They were incredible.
We're gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out right after this.
Well, yeah, we're gonna go live, so
yeah, they've got a lot of like they released an album called We Like It Here, and it's all recorded live, and all the videos of them recording it are on YouTube. So like go and watch Shofukan and What About Me. Just blow your mind. Absolutely blow your mind.
And are you guys, I know this whole COVID situation, when are you guys, have you guys ever played in America?
Oh no, we've not even played outside of Scotland. Like, we don't do a lot of live shows. We tend to, there's a lot of us in the kind of core band at the moment. There's like, well, there's kind of 5 main people, but there's at least 7 people who I call when we're doing a show. It can be really difficult to arrange shows, and I tend to only do it with bands I really like. But I'd love to play in America. I'd love to play Europe.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple publicists. We'll see what we can do.
Then we'll get on that, see what's going to happen. We have a $75 partner tier on Patreon where people can request us to react to whatever song that they want. And Marco is how we got to hear your band. So I didn't know if you want to say a little message to Marco for bringing it to us.
Well, it's insanely generous, like absolutely insanely generous, and we really, really appreciate it. Marco actually bought some stuff off of our Bandcamp not long before we saw the video, and so like I put in a wee note in there with it, as I tend to do, but if I'd known, I would have put a much bigger one. So thank you so much, Marco, you absolute legend. We'll have to sort you out with something when the next album comes around. You're a good lad.
Oh, that's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Ashenspire, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, look, some bands, it's about, just pushing each other around the mosh pit. That's all good. I love it. But some bands, you got to think.
Yep.
Think.
Yep. It's more than purgatory.
Well, it's a metaphorical purgatory on the show.
I kind of got it a little bit. Good thing you were there.
The moral of the entire interview is that you should always agree with Vincent.
Oh my word, that's not going to happen. So let's just not even pretend that you said that. Because
I think you should be open to criticism.
Thank you so much.
This guy's extremely diplomatic, huh?
Yeah.
You chauvinist bastard. Be open to criticism. I love it.
Maybe he was saying that to me.
There you go. We are the best channel on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Where else can you find something like this? Yeah. Nowhere. Thank you so much, my guy. Really appreciate it. And I just flat out enjoyed the conversation. Even if I wasn't, even if we weren't doing a thingamajig, I'd talk to the guy.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Like, I was very much hoping that it would be more of a conversation because that's a lot more fun. And I could have seen this happening over beers in a better world.
Yeah, exactly. When you did the little bite for us at the beginning and it was called Conversations with Vin and Sori, were you like, oh, it might be a conversation? Maybe that's why they're calling it
Instead of an interview. Yeah, that's what we're about. All right, guys. Look, you keep paying attention. If you've got a band that you think we should interview, let us know and we'll reach out to them. And I just knew we were going to get this interview, though. I just knew it. I just felt something.
I had that feeling.
Yeah, because I never say that. I never say we're going to interview this band. But
I'm glad you did because this has been great, super great.
Excellent. By the way, so you're working on another record. Do you have the release date, title for that?
So we have some stuff in the works. We're recording at the end of the year. If everything lets up, we should be recording in October, November. It's called, Working Title at the moment, but I'm pretty set on it. It's going to be called Hostile Architecture, and it's going to be about but lots more in brutalist buildings, and it's kind of more of a modern focus as opposed to the kind of Victorian imperialist one that we just had.
Yeah, hostile architecture. I don't know how you can get much better than that for a title.
Oh, I know, that's great.
Where can people see you? Website, Bandcamp, all that. Let us know. What is it?
Yeah, you can find us at ashenspire.bandcamp.com. We're on Facebook as Ashenspire, Instagram. We have a Tumblr, although Tumblr is dead these days, but best place to support us is on Bandcamp. You can buy t-shirts, CDs, etc., etc.
All right, cool.
All those links will be in the description.
Yep. Send me a message on Messenger with all those links, and I'll pop it right into the description of this.
Absolument.
Excellent.
All right.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. Vin out.
Sorry out.
Alistair out.
Gone.